The morning mist clung to the mountainside like a shroud, and Elena Vasquez adjusted her scope one final time. 3 miles below, the enemy camp sprawled across the valley floor like a dark stain against the green landscape. She had been lying in this position for 18 hours, her body perfectly still, breathing controlled, waiting for the perfect moment. Her radio crackled softly. "Viper, this is command. We've got movement in Sector 7. 3 high-value targets confirmed." Elena pressed her earpiece gently. "Copy, command. I have visual on the targets." Through her scope, she could see the 3 enemy generals clearly. General Morrison stood near the command tent, his distinctive silver hair catching the early sunlight. General Blackwood paced back and forth by the communications array, his nervous energy evident even from this distance. General Torres sat at a folding table studying maps with his staff officers. These weren't ordinary soldiers. These were the masterminds behind the brutal campaign that had claimed thousands of innocent lives. Morrison had ordered the bombing of hospitals. Blackwood had authorized the use of chemical weapons against civilians. Torres had personally overseen the execution of prisoners of war. Commander Jackson's voice echoed in her memory from the briefing 12 hours earlier. "Nobody can hit those targets from that distance, Vasquez. The wind patterns alone make it impossible. We'll have to find another way." Elena had simply nodded, gathered her equipment, and disappeared into the night. She had never been one for lengthy discussions or debates. When others talked about impossibilities, she quietly prepared for success. The daughter of a small-town sheriff, Elena had learned to shoot before she could properly ride a bicycle. Her father had taken her hunting in the mountains every weekend, teaching her patience, precision, and respect for the power she held in her hands. When she turned 18, the military recruiter who visited her high school couldn't believe the scores she achieved on the marksmanship tests. Now, 8 years later, she was the military's most precise long-range specialist. Her record spoke for itself: 47 confirmed eliminations, 0 civilian casualties, 0 failed missions. But this assignment pushed every boundary she had ever encountered. The distance was extreme, nearly 2 miles beyond her previous longest shot. The weather conditions were challenging, with unpredictable mountain winds that could shift a bullet's trajectory by several feet. Most difficult of all, she had to eliminate 3 separate targets within a narrow time window, before the remaining generals could react and disappear into their heavily fortified bunkers. Elena closed her eyes and felt the wind against her face. Her grandfather, a veteran of 3 wars, had taught her to read the mountains like a book. Every gust of wind had a story. Every shift in temperature carried information. Every sound in the forest revealed the secrets of the environment around her. She opened her eyes and studied the valley again. The enemy soldiers moved in predictable patterns around the camp. Guards changed shifts every 4 hours. Supply trucks arrived at regular intervals. Officers gathered for briefings at specific times. Elena had memorized every detail during her long surveillance. Her rifle was a custom-built precision instrument, modified specifically for extreme long-range work. The barrel had been handcrafted by the finest gunsmiths in the country. The scope was military-grade technology that could distinguish individual features on a target at distances that seemed impossible. Every component had been tested, adjusted, and calibrated to perfection, but even the finest equipment meant nothing without the human element. Elena's heartbeat was steady at 58 beats per minute, her breathing slow and controlled. Her hands were rock steady despite the cold mountain air. Her mind was clear, focused entirely on the task ahead. The radio crackled again. "Viper, we're showing increased activity in the camp. Looks like they might be preparing to move. Window of opportunity is closing." Elena adjusted her position slightly, feeling the familiar weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. 3 shots, 3 targets, 3 chances to end a conflict that had already lasted too long and cost too many lives. She thought about the villages she had seen during her insertion into the mountains. Burned houses, empty schools, abandoned playgrounds where children should have been laughing and playing. The enemy generals below had created this devastation with their orders, their strategies, their complete disregard for human life. General Morrison stepped away from the command tent and walked toward a cluster of vehicles. His bodyguards flanked him closely, but Elena had already identified the brief moments when he would be exposed. General Blackwood continued his restless pacing, following a pattern that would bring him into the open at predictable intervals. General Torres remained seated at his table, apparently absorbed in his tactical planning. Elena's training had taught her to think of targets as objectives rather than people. It was easier that way, cleaner somehow, but she never forgot the human cost of her actions. Every shot she fired carried the weight of justice, the responsibility of protecting innocent lives, and the burden of taking a human life, regardless of how justified the action might be. The wind shifted slightly and Elena felt the change immediately. She made a minute adjustment to her scope, compensating for the new conditions. Mathematics and instinct combined in her mind, calculating trajectories, accounting for bullet drop, predicting the movement of her targets. 3 bullets waited in her rifle. 3 men waited in the valley below. 3 shots that could change the course of the entire conflict. Elena settled deeper into her position, her body becoming one with the mountainside. Her breathing slowed even further. Her heartbeat seemed to synchronize with the rhythm of the earth itself. Every muscle in her body relaxed except for those absolutely necessary to maintain her shooting position. The first shot would be the most critical. Once she fired, the entire camp would go into emergency mode. Guards would scramble for cover. Officers would rush toward the bunkers. The remaining 2 targets would have perhaps 30 seconds before they reached safety. Elena's finger found the trigger. Not quite touching it yet, just resting nearby, ready for the moment when everything aligned perfectly. Wind speed, target position, her own physical state, the timing of the camp's activities, everything had to come together in a single, perfect instant. Through her scope, she watched General Morrison approach his vehicle. 20 more steps and he would be in the optimal position. General Blackwood had paused in his pacing, speaking to an aide. General Torres was looking up from his maps, apparently listening to a report from one of his staff officers. Elena's breathing became so shallow, it was almost imperceptible. Her finger moved to the trigger. The world around her faded away until only the view through her scope remained. Time seemed to slow down as she prepared to prove that sometimes, what commanders declared impossible was simply another challenge waiting to be overcome. The first shot rang out across the valley like thunder, echoing off the mountain walls in a series of rolling reverberations that seemed to last forever. General Morrison dropped instantly, his body crumpling beside the armored vehicle he had been approaching. His bodyguard spun around in confusion, their eyes scanning the mountainsides for a threat they couldn't locate. Elena was already adjusting her aim before the echo of her first shot had faded. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, working the bolt action to chamber the second round. Through her scope, she could see the camp erupting into chaos, soldiers scattered in every direction, some diving for cover behind vehicles, others running toward the command bunkers. General Blackwood had frozen at the sound of the gunshot, his head turning toward where Morrison had fallen. For a critical moment, he stood perfectly exposed in the open area between 2 tents. Elena's crosshairs found him just as he began to move toward cover. The second shot followed within 15 seconds of the first. The bullet traveled its long arc through the mountain air, accounting for wind drift and elevation, finding its target with mathematical precision. General Blackwood stumbled and fell, his military cap rolling away across the dusty ground. 2 down, 1 remaining. Elena cycled her rifle again, her movements automatic and fluid. 8 years of training had programmed these actions into her muscle memory. Her hands knew exactly what to do while her mind focused entirely on the target. General Torres had reacted faster than his colleagues. At the first gunshot, he had immediately begun moving toward the heavily armored command bunker. His bodyguards formed a protective circle around him, but Elena could see gaps in their formation as they struggled to maintain protection while moving quickly across uneven ground. Through her radio earpiece, Elena could hear the frantic communications from the enemy camp. Their radio operators were screaming for backup, calling for helicopter extraction, demanding immediate evacuation for their remaining commanders. The panic in their voices was evident even through the static and distance. Elena tracked Torres through her scope as he ran. 30 yards to the bunker entrance, 20 yards, 15. Her finger rested on the trigger, waiting for the perfect moment when his protective detail would shift position or when he would emerge from behind their cover. The opportunity came when Torres stumbled slightly on the rough ground. His bodyguards momentarily broke formation to help steady him, and for less than 2 seconds Elena had a clear shot. Her finger squeezed the trigger with the same gentle pressure she had used thousands of times on the practice range. The third shot flew true, covering the incredible distance in just over 3 seconds. General Torres collapsed 10 yards from the bunker entrance, his desperate run for safety ending just short of his goal. Elena immediately began breaking down her position. The enemy would be calling in artillery strikes on the mountains within minutes, flooding the entire area with explosive shells in hopes of killing the invisible sniper, who had just eliminated their 3 most senior commanders. She had perhaps 5 minutes to reach her primary extraction point. Her movements were swift but controlled as she disassembled her rifle and packed her equipment. Every item had its designated place in her pack, arranged for maximum efficiency and minimum noise. Her camouflage netting came down in seconds, rolled up and secured to her belt. As she prepared to move, Elena allowed herself one final look through her binoculars at the valley below. The enemy camp was in complete disarray. Soldiers ran back and forth without clear direction. Vehicles raced toward the command area. Medical personnel rushed between the fallen generals. But Elena knew their efforts would be futile. She had studied each target extensively during her mission preparation. She knew their backgrounds, their tactical preferences, their personal histories. Morrison had been a career military officer who had risen through the ranks during peacetime, then had abandoned all ethical constraints when real conflict began. Blackwood had been a brilliant strategist who had chosen to apply his skills to the systematic destruction of civilian populations. Torres had been a decorated war hero who had gradually transformed into something far darker. Elena felt no satisfaction in their deaths, but she experienced a deep sense of completion. Justice had been served. The villages in the mountains would be safer now. The hospital bombing would stop. The chemical weapons attacks would end. Thousands of innocent people would live, because these 3 men would no longer be giving orders. Moving through the mountain forest required different skills than long-range shooting. But Elena had mastered these as well. She moved like a shadow between the trees, her footsteps silent on the forest floor. Every few hundred yards she paused to listen for sounds of pursuit. But the enemy soldiers were still focused on securing their camp rather than hunting for the sniper. Her extraction route took her along a ridge, line that provided good cover while allowing rapid movement toward the rendezvous point. Elena had memorized every rock, every tree, every possible hiding spot along this path during her insertion 18 hours earlier. She knew exactly where to step to avoid loose stones that might create noise, which branches to avoid that might snap under pressure, how to move through the underbrush without leaving obvious tracks. The radio in her pack crackled softly. Viper command. We're seeing massive activity in the enemy camp. Can you confirm mission status? Elena keyed her radio briefly. Mission accomplished. 3 targets eliminated. Moving to extraction point Alpha. Copy, Viper. Outstanding work. Extraction team is standing by. Elena continued through the forest, her mind already shifting from the completed mission to the challenges of getting safely out of enemy territory. The hardest part was over, but she wouldn't truly relax until she was back behind friendly lines. As she moved, Elena reflected on Commander Jackson's words from the briefing. Nobody can hit those targets from that distance. She understood his perspective. The shot had pushed every limit of what was technically possible with current equipment and training. Wind conditions, target distance, multiple moving targets, time constraints, any one of these factors alone would have made the mission extremely difficult, but Elena had learned long ago that impossible was often just another word for hasn't been done yet. Her father had taught her that every mountain could be climbed if you took it one step at a time. Her grandfather had shown her that patience and preparation could overcome almost any obstacle. Her military training had given her the technical skills to translate that philosophy into action. Behind her, the sounds of artillery began echoing across the mountains as the enemy commenced their desperate bombardment of the sniper positions. Shell explosions flashed against the morning sky, but Elena was already more than a mile away from her shooting position, moving steadily toward safety. The mission had taken 3 shots in less than 30 seconds to complete. But the preparation had required months of planning, days of reconnaissance, and years of training. Elena understood that success in her profession came not from dramatic moments of action, but from countless hours of quiet preparation that nobody ever saw or celebrated. She reached the extraction point exactly on schedule, where a helicopter waited to carry her back to base. As the aircraft lifted off from the mountain clearing, Elena looked back one final time at the valley where 3 enemy generals had learned that sometimes the impossible was simply a challenge waiting for the right person to accept it. The helicopter touched down at Forward Operating Base Delta, just as the sun reached its zenith over the mountains. Elena climbed out of the aircraft, her equipment bag slung over her shoulder, her face showing no trace of the morning's extraordinary events. To any observer, she looked like just another soldier returning from a routine patrol. Commander Jackson waited near the landing pad, his expression a mixture of disbelief and grudging admiration. When the initial reports had come in from battlefield surveillance, he had assumed there had been some mistake. 3 enemy generals eliminated by a single sniper from an impossible distance? It sounded like the kind of story that grew larger with each telling. Elena approached him with her usual quiet demeanor. She never showed emotion after completing a mission, never celebrated or boasted about her achievements. Her grandfather had taught her that a job well done spoke for itself, and that true professionals found their satisfaction in the work itself, rather than in recognition from others. "Vasquez," Commander Jackson said, his voice carrying a note of amazement he couldn't quite hide. "I owe you an apology. When I said nobody could make those shots, I wasn't questioning your abilities. I was thinking about the technical limitations." Elena simply nodded. "The mission is complete, sir. All objectives achieved." She handed him a small digital recorder containing her detailed after-action report. Elena always recorded her observations immediately after each mission, while the details remained fresh in her memory. Wind conditions, target behavior, equipment performance, timing of each shot, everything that might be useful for future operations. The debriefing took place in a secure conference room where Elena methodically explained every aspect of the mission. She drew diagrams showing her shooting position, marked wind patterns on topographical maps, and provided precise timing for each phase of the operation. Her report was thorough and professional, delivered in the same calm tone she might use to describe a training exercise. Colonel Martinez, the base commander, listened intently to every detail. He had personally reviewed Elena's service record before approving her for this mission, but even he hadn't fully grasped the scope of what she was attempting. The combination of distance, environmental conditions, and multiple moving targets created a challenge that pushed beyond the known limits of sniper operations. "What was the total distance on your longest shot?" Colonel Martinez asked. 2,740 meters to the final target, Elena replied. Wind conditions were variable, gusting between 12 and 18 miles per hour from the southwest. Temperature was 43 degrees Fahrenheit with 67% humidity. The technical precision of her answer reflected the methodical approach that had made the mission possible. Elena never relied on luck or instinct alone. Every shot was the result of careful calculation, environmental analysis, and precise execution based on proven principles. After the formal debriefing, Elena returned to her quarters to clean and maintain her equipment. Her rifle required meticulous care after every use, especially following a mission of this complexity. She disassembled every component, cleaned each part individually, checked for any signs of wear or damage, and reassembled everything with the same attention to detail she brought to her shooting. Her quarters were spartanly furnished but impeccably organized. Elena's personal belongings occupied minimal space: a few books on military history and mathematics, photographs of her family back home, and a collection of precision measurement tools that most people would mistake for jewelry. She lived simply, finding that fewer possessions meant fewer distractions from her work. That evening, Elena received word that her mission had already produced significant strategic results. Without their 3 senior commanders, the enemy forces in the valley had begun a chaotic withdrawal. Units were retreating without coordination, abandoning equipment and fortified positions that had taken months to establish. The entire regional campaign was collapsing, as subordinate officers struggled to maintain command and control. Intelligence reports indicated that the enemy leadership was in complete disarray. They had no immediate replacements for the eliminated generals, and their command structure had been built around the specific expertise and relationships of those 3 men. What had seemed like a minor tactical operation, eliminating 3 individuals, had created strategic consequences far beyond what anyone had anticipated. Elena read these reports with professional interest but no personal satisfaction. She understood that her actions had military and political implications, but she focused on the immediate human impact. Villages that had been under siege could now be resupplied. Civilian populations could return to their homes. Medical facilities could operate without fear of systematic targeting. Late that night, Elena received a secure communication from her family. Her father's message was typically brief. "Heard you had a good day at work. Your mother and I are proud of you." Her younger brother, currently attending college on a military scholarship Elena had helped arrange, sent a longer message describing his studies and thanking her for making his education possible. Elena's family had never fully understood the nature of her work. They knew she was a military specialist, that her assignments were classified, and that she occasionally disappeared for extended periods without explanation. They didn't know about the specific missions, the confirmed eliminations, or the strategic importance of her actions. Elena preferred it that way. Her family saw her as their daughter and sister, not as a weapon employed by their government. The next morning brought new intelligence briefings and preliminary discussions about future operations. The success of Elena's mission had opened new possibilities for unconventional warfare applications. Staff officers were already developing plans for similar operations in other theaters, hoping to replicate the strategic impact of precise, long-range eliminations. Elena listened to these discussions with growing concern. She understood the appeal of her methods from a military planning perspective. Single operators could achieve results that might otherwise require major troop deployments. The cost in human lives and resources was minimal compared to conventional military operations. The political implications were more manageable when success could be achieved through precise, targeted actions rather than large-scale conflicts. But Elena also recognized the limitations and dangers of this approach. Her mission had succeeded because of exceptional circumstances: ideal terrain, extensive preparation time, detailed intelligence on target behavior, and favorable weather conditions. Most situations would not provide such advantages. Attempting to replicate her success without similar preparation and conditions would likely result in failure and potentially compromise future operations. More importantly, Elena understood that her abilities were not unlimited. Every successful mission increased expectations for the next one. Eventually, she would be asked to attempt something truly impossible, not just technically challenging. The military planning community was beginning to view her as a technological solution rather than a human being with inherent limitations. Commander Jackson approached her after the morning briefing. "Vasquez, I wanted to apologize again for my comments yesterday. I've been thinking about what you accomplished, and I realize I was looking at the problem from the wrong perspective." Elena turned to face him, waiting for him to continue. "I was focused on why it couldn't be done instead of figuring out how it could be done. That's the difference between management and leadership, I suppose." Elena nodded thoughtfully. "The mission parameters were challenging, sir, but they were within acceptable risk levels given adequate preparation and favorable conditions." Commander Jackson smiled slightly. "You make it sound routine." "Every mission is routine if you prepare properly," Elena replied. "The extraordinary results come from ordinary methods applied with exceptional precision." This philosophy had guided Elena throughout her career. She didn't consider herself remarkable or heroic. She simply approached each challenge with thorough preparation, careful analysis, and methodical execution. The spectacular outcomes were byproducts of consistent application of proven principles, rather than moments of inspiration or supernatural ability. As the day progressed, Elena began preparing for her next assignment. She didn't yet know what it would be, but she understood that yesterday's success had ensured there would be another mission, probably sooner rather than later. The war continued and her skills remained in demand. 3 weeks after her mountain mission, Elena found herself in a completely different environment. The dense urban landscape of Meridian City sprawled before her, its concrete towers and narrow alleys presenting challenges that no amount of mountain training could have prepared her for. The enemy had regrouped in this metropolitan area, establishing a new command structure behind the cover of civilian populations. Intelligence reports indicated that 3 replacement generals had been brought in to restore order to the scattered enemy forces. These weren't the same type of targets as before. General Kozlov was an urban warfare specialist who rarely appeared in public. General Hassan was a master of guerrilla tactics who changed locations every few hours. General Burke was a communications expert who coordinated operations. From heavily fortified buildings surrounded by civilian shields, Elena studied the city from her temporary observation post on the 20th floor of an abandoned office building. The urban environment created completely different problems than the mountain valley. Instead of calculating wind patterns across open terrain, she had to account for air currents created by tall buildings. Instead of clear lines of sight across empty space, she had to work with narrow windows of opportunity between structures. Instead of isolated military targets, she had to operate in an area where any missed shot could endanger innocent people. Commander Jackson had been reluctant to authorize this mission. The city changes everything, Vasquez. Too many variables, too many civilians, too much risk of collateral damage. Elena had spent 2 weeks studying satellite imagery, drone surveillance footage, and intelligence reports about the 3 targets. She had identified their patterns, their security procedures, their preferred routes through the city. Most importantly, she had located 3 positions where each target would be vulnerable for brief periods during their daily routines. The first target, General Kozlov, maintained his headquarters in a converted hotel on the eastern side of the city. Every morning at exactly 7:30, he stepped onto a small balcony on the 15th floor to survey the surrounding area. His bodyguards checked the balcony first, then took positions inside the room while Kozlov spent precisely 3 minutes examining the city through binoculars. Elena had identified a sight line from an abandoned construction site 800 meters away. The shot would have to pass between 2 office buildings over a busy street and through a gap in the balcony railing that was only 18 inches wide. The timing window was critical. Kozlov would be exposed for exactly 180 seconds. The second target, General Hassan, operated from a mobile command center that moved throughout the western districts of the city, but intelligence had discovered that he visited the same small cafe every Wednesday afternoon at 2 o'clock. He always sat at the same table, always ordered the same meal, and always positioned himself with his back to the same window. The pattern had been consistent for 6 weeks. Elena's shooting position for Hassan would be the roof of the apartment building 4 blocks away. The bullet would travel over rooftops and through narrow spaces between buildings before reaching the target. Wind conditions in the urban canyon created by the surrounding structures would be unpredictable and constantly changing. The third target, General Burke, presented the most difficult challenge. He worked from a heavily fortified communications center that was virtually impenetrable. But twice a week he traveled by armored vehicle to inspect remote communication installations on the outskirts of the city. During these trips, his convoy followed the same route along an elevated highway that passed through an industrial district. There was only one position that offered a clear shot at the highway, the roof of a chemical processing plant that was still partially operational. Elena would have to eliminate Burke during the brief moment when his vehicle passed through her crosshairs, accounting for the speed of the moving target and the complex ballistics of shooting. From an elevated position down at a moving vehicle, Elena had never attempted 3 separate eliminations in an urban environment over an extended period. Each shot would alert the remaining targets to her presence. After the first elimination, the other generals would certainly modify their routines, increase their security, and potentially change locations entirely. She would have to complete all 3 missions within a 72-hour window before the enemy could adapt to the new threat. The urban environment also created legal and political complications that hadn't existed in the mountain operation. International law governing military operations in populated areas was complex and restrictive. Any civilian casualties could create diplomatic problems for her government. The enemy was certainly counting on these constraints to provide them with protection. Elena's equipment had been modified for urban operations. Her rifle was fitted with a suppressor to reduce the sound signature that would echo through the city streets. Her ammunition was specially designed to minimize overpenetration that could endanger people in buildings behind her targets. Her scope had been calibrated for the shorter ranges and different atmospheric conditions of the metropolitan environment. On Monday morning, Elena positioned herself in the construction site overlooking General Kozlov's headquarters. She had arrived at 3 in the morning, giving herself ample time to prepare her shooting position and study the environmental conditions. The city created its own weather patterns, with temperature variations between sunny and shaded areas affecting air density and bullet trajectory. At 7:25, Elena watched through her scope as Kozlov's bodyguards emerged onto the balcony. They checked the area methodically, looking for potential threats from nearby buildings. Elena remained perfectly still in her concealed position, invisible among the construction materials and scaffolding. At exactly 7:30, Kozlov stepped onto the balcony. Elena's crosshairs found him immediately. The general raised his binoculars and began his routine survey of the city. Elena controlled her breathing, calculated the environmental factors, and waited for the optimal moment. The shot traveled through the urban canyon in less than a second, passing between the office buildings exactly as Elena had calculated. General Kozlov dropped immediately, his binoculars clattering onto the balcony floor. His bodyguards rushed to his aid, but Elena was already packing her equipment and preparing to move to her second position. Within 15 minutes, police sirens were wailing throughout the Eastern District as emergency responders converged on the hotel. Elena moved through the city using predetermined routes that avoided the main streets and surveillance cameras. Her next position was across town, and she had only 26 hours to prepare for her second shot. The death of General Kozlov sent shockwaves through the enemy command structure. Emergency security protocols were immediately implemented. General Hassan canceled his scheduled activities and disappeared into a safe house. General Burke increased his personal security detail and modified his travel plans. But Elena had anticipated these reactions. Her intelligence preparation had included contingency plans for various defensive measures the enemy might employ. She knew where Hassan's safe houses were located. She had identified alternative routes Burke might use for his convoy movements. Most importantly, she understood that the enemy's security improvements would also create new patterns and routines that could be exploited. Tuesday afternoon found Elena on the apartment building roof, waiting for General Hassan. Intelligence sources had confirmed that despite the increased security, Hassan would still make his Wednesday cafe visit. His ego and his need to maintain contact with local supporters made him reluctant to abandon his established routine completely. But Hassan had made changes. His security detail was larger. His route to the cafe was different. Most significantly, he arrived 45 minutes earlier than usual, apparently hoping to avoid the established pattern that had been compromised. Elena had been prepared for exactly this type of adaptation. She had been in position since dawn, ready to take the shot whenever Hassan appeared. When his modified security convoy arrived at the cafe, Elena was ready. The second shot was more challenging than the first, due to the increased number of bodyguards and the altered positioning around the target. But Elena had studied Hassan's personal habits extensively. Even with enhanced security, he still insisted on sitting at his preferred table with his back to the same window. Old habits proved stronger than new precautions. General Hassan fell forward onto his cafe table, his afternoon meal untouched. Elena was already moving toward her third and final position before his bodyguards realized what had happened. 2 down, 1 remaining, and less than 24 hours to complete the mission before the entire enemy command structure disappeared underground. Wednesday evening brought news that would change everything. General Burke had not only modified his convoy route, but intelligence reported he was preparing to evacuate the city entirely. His mobile communications center was being dismantled, and satellite imagery showed unusual activity around several potential extraction points on the city's perimeter. Elena received the updated intelligence briefing while positioned on the chemical plant roof. She had been waiting for 12 hours, watching the elevated highway where Burke's convoy was supposed to pass. The industrial facility around her hummed with activity as workers continued their round-the-clock operations, unaware that a military sniper lay concealed among their rooftop equipment. "Viper, this is command," her radio crackled softly. "Target 3 has altered his timeline. He's moving his extraction up by 18 hours. New intelligence suggests he'll be departing the city at approximately 2100 hours tonight." Elena checked her watch. 8:15 p.m. Less than 3 hours to locate and eliminate a target who was actively trying to disappear. The carefully planned highway intercept was no longer viable. Burke would be using back roads and alternative routes to reach his extraction point. "Command, what are the possible extraction locations?" Elena whispered into her radio. "Intelligence identifies 3 high-probability sites: Warehouse District Pier 17, private airfield in Sector 12, and industrial helicopter pad in Sector 9. He could be using any of them." Elena studied her tactical map of the city. The 3 locations were miles apart, each requiring different approaches and shooting positions. She couldn't cover all 3 simultaneously, and she had no way to determine which one Burke would actually use. This was the kind of impossible tactical problem that had no perfect solution, but Elena had learned to work with incomplete information. Her grandfather's hunting wisdom echoed in her mind. When you can't predict where the deer will go, you find the place they have to pass through to get anywhere. Elena examined her map more carefully, tracing the routes from Burke's last known position to each potential extraction site. Despite the different destinations, all 3 routes had to pass through the same general area of the city, due to the layout of the main roads and the locations of bridges across the river that divided the metropolitan area. There was one overpass where Burke's convoy would have to travel regardless of which extraction point he chose. The Meridian Bridge was the only river crossing that could handle heavy military vehicles, and all roads from the central city to the potential extraction sites converged at this choke point. Elena packed her equipment quickly and began moving toward the bridge. She had 90 minutes to reach a shooting position, set up her equipment, and prepare for a target that might or might not appear. Even if Burke did use the bridge, she would have only seconds to identify and engage his vehicle among the normal traffic. The bridge approach offered limited positioning options for a sniper. Most of the surrounding area was open ground with minimal cover. The few buildings nearby were actively occupied commercial structures where Elena couldn't establish a concealed position without risking discovery. She finally located a possibility. An abandoned railway bridge that ran parallel to the main road bridge about 400 meters away. The old steel structure was scheduled for demolition, but the project had been delayed by bureaucratic complications. Elena could position herself among the rusted girders and get a clear line of sight to the road bridge. Climbing the railway bridge in full equipment required careful movement in complete darkness. Elena's hands found purchase on the old steel beams while her feet located secure footing on the maintenance walkways. The structure groaned slightly under her weight, but it held firm. She reached a position halfway across the span that provided the optimal angle for her shot. Elena set up her rifle among the bridge supports, using the steel framework to create a stable shooting platform. The range to the road bridge was longer than her previous urban shots, but well within her capabilities. The main challenge would be identifying Burke's vehicle among the traffic and making the shot, while the convoy was moving at highway speed. At 9:40 p.m., Elena's radio delivered crucial intelligence. "Viper, surveillance assets have identified Target 3's convoy. 3 black armored vehicles traveling eastbound on River Road. Estimated arrival at Meridian Bridge in 12 minutes. Elena adjusted her scope and settled into her shooting position. Through the optics, she could see the bridge clearly illuminated by streetlights. Normal civilian traffic moved across the span in both directions. Burke's convoy would blend with this traffic, making target identification more difficult. "Command, can you provide vehicle identification details?" Elena requested. "Lead vehicle is a modified SUV with diplomatic plates. Middle vehicle is a heavy armored transport, likely carrying Target 3. Trail vehicle is a support SUV with visible communications equipment." Elena focused on the middle vehicle. Burke would be inside the armored transport, probably in the rear passenger compartment. The vehicle's armor would stop most small arms fire, but Elena's rifle was designed to penetrate military-grade protection at these ranges. At 9:51, Elena spotted the convoy approaching the bridge. 3 black vehicles in the described configuration, moving slightly faster than the surrounding traffic. The lead SUV was already on the bridge span, with the armored transport following 30 meters behind. Elena tracked the middle vehicle through her scope as it moved across the bridge. The armored transport was larger and heavier than the other vehicles, its reinforced construction clearly visible even in the streetlight illumination. She could see the silhouettes of passengers inside, but the armored glass made positive target identification impossible. The convoy was moving at approximately 45 miles per hour, requiring Elena to lead her target significantly to account for the vehicle's movement during the bullet's flight time. She had practiced similar shots during training, but never under operational conditions with this level of precision required. Elena's finger found the trigger as the armored transport reached the center of the bridge span. This was her optimal shooting window. The vehicle was moving in a straight line with predictable speed, and there were no civilians directly behind the target to be endangered by overpenetration. The shot rang out across the river, the sound echoing off the water and the surrounding buildings. Elena's bullet struck the rear passenger window of the armored transport, penetrating the reinforced glass and finding its target inside. The vehicle immediately began to swerve, its driver struggling to maintain control as the convoy erupted into chaos. The armored transport crashed into the bridge railing, coming to a violent stop as steam poured from its damaged radiator. The lead and trail vehicles screeched to a halt, their occupants jumping out with weapons ready. But Elena was already moving, dismantling her position and preparing to escape from the old railway bridge. Through her scope, Elena had seen General Burke's distinctive silhouette slump forward in the rear seat of the transport. After 18 months of studying intelligence photographs and surveillance footage, she recognized his profile instantly. The third and final target had been eliminated. Elena's extraction from the railway bridge required the same careful movement she had used during her approach, but now she had to work quickly while maintaining stealth. Emergency vehicles were already racing toward the bridge, their sirens wailing through the night air. Police helicopters would be airborne within minutes, searching for the sniper who had just eliminated a high-value target in the middle of the city. She reached the ground and melted into the urban landscape, following predetermined escape routes through alleys and side streets that would take her away from the bridge area. Elena's civilian clothing and nondescript appearance allowed her to blend with the normal foot traffic, just another person walking through the city on a Wednesday evening. By 10:30 p.m., Elena had reached her safe house in a residential district far from the bridge. She immediately began transmitting her mission completion report to command, while monitoring news broadcasts about the incident. Local media was reporting a terrorist attack on the bridge, with officials confirming that a foreign military advisor had been killed in the assault. Elena's 3-day urban mission was complete. 3 enemy generals eliminated in 3 different locations using 3 different tactical approaches. The mission had required adaptability, precision timing, and the ability to operate effectively in a complex environment where any mistake could have resulted in civilian casualties or diplomatic complications. The strategic impact was immediately apparent. Without their 3 senior commanders, the enemy forces in Meridian City began a hasty withdrawal. Communication networks that Burke had spent months establishing went silent. Urban warfare operations that Hassan had coordinated collapsed into confusion. The defensive positions that Kozlov had fortified were abandoned as subordinate officers lost the leadership structure they had depended on. Elena spent the next 48 hours in the safe house, monitoring the situation and preparing for extraction. Intelligence reports confirmed that the enemy was evacuating their remaining personnel from the city, effectively conceding control of the metropolitan area to government forces. A campaign that military planners had expected to last months had been concluded in less than a week. On Friday evening, Elena received her extraction orders. A civilian cargo flight would carry her out of the city, returning her to military command for debriefing and reassignment. As she prepared to leave, Elena reflected on the unique challenges the urban environment had presented. Mountain warfare was about patience and precision across great distances. Urban warfare was about adaptability and timing in close quarters. Both required the same fundamental skills: careful preparation, environmental awareness, and the ability to execute under pressure. But they applied those skills in completely different ways. Elena had proven that her capabilities extended beyond the mountain sniper role that had first brought her to military attention. She could operate effectively in any environment where precision elimination was required. This versatility made her an even more valuable asset, but it also meant that her missions would likely become more complex and dangerous as commanders recognized the full scope of her abilities. The flight out of Meridian City departed at midnight, carrying Elena back toward her home base and whatever assignment awaited her next. Through the aircraft window, she could see the lights of the city spread out below, already returning to normal patterns as the immediate crisis passed. Elena closed her eyes and tried to rest during the flight, She had completed another impossible mission, eliminated 3 high-value targets under challenging conditions, and achieved strategic objectives that conventional military operations might have required weeks or months to accomplish. But Elena knew that each success raised the bar for the next mission. Somewhere, military planners were already studying her after-action reports and developing new assignments that would push her skills even further. The war continued, and there would always be another target. Another impossible shot. Another chance to prove that nobody can hit that. Was just another challenge waiting to be overcome. 6 months after the Meridian City operation, Elena found herself in the most challenging assignment of her career. The briefing had taken place in a secure facility deep underground, with only the highest-ranking officers present. The target was unlike anything she had faced before. General Alexander Petrov, the architect of a biological weapons program that threatened millions of civilian lives. Petrov was not just another military commander. He was a scientist, a strategist, and a master of personal security who had survived 3 previous assassination attempts by conventional forces. Intelligence reports described him as paranoid to the point of obsession, constantly changing locations using body doubles, and employing countermeasures that had frustrated every effort to eliminate him. "This isn't like your previous missions, Vasquez," General Morrison had explained during the classified briefing. "Petrov knows he's being hunted. He studied your methods from the mountain operation and the urban eliminations. He's specifically preparing defenses against long-range sniper attacks." Elena had listened without comment as the intelligence officers outlined Petrov's current activities. He was operating from a mobile laboratory complex that moved between different locations every 48 hours. The facility was heavily guarded by elite soldiers who had been trained specifically in anti-sniper tactics. Electronic warfare equipment constantly scanned for surveillance devices and communication signals. Most challenging of all, Petrov had begun using advanced decoy techniques. Multiple vehicles in his convoy carried individuals who resembled him physically. His public appearances were carefully staged with body doubles who mimicked his mannerisms and appearance. Even thermal imaging couldn't reliably distinguish between Petrov and his substitutes due to sophisticated heat signature masking technology. "Why not use a different approach?" Elena had asked. "Close quarters elimination, infiltration team artillery strike on his facility?" "His security is too tight for infiltration," General Morrison replied. "Artillery would destroy the biological samples we need to recover, and could potentially release contaminated materials into the environment. We need precision elimination that leaves his laboratory intact for our specialists to secure." Elena studied the intelligence files for 2 weeks before accepting the mission. Petrov's security measures were indeed formidable, but they also revealed patterns and limitations. His paranoia made him predictable in certain ways. His elaborate precautions required significant resources and coordination that created their own vulnerabilities. The key insight came when Elena analyzed Petrov's communication patterns. Despite all his security measures, he maintained regular contact with a small network of scientists and political supporters. These communications required him to access secure transmission equipment at specific intervals, and that equipment needed clear sightlines to satellite networks. Elena identified a pattern in Petrov's movements that was related to his communication schedule rather than his security concerns. Every 72 hours, his mobile facility had to position itself at a location with optimal satellite access for a critical transmission window. There were only 4 locations in his operational area that provided the necessary communication capabilities. More importantly, Elena discovered that Petrov personally supervised these transmissions. His paranoia extended to his communication security. He refused to delegate the most sensitive discussions to subordinates. During the transmission windows, he had to be physically present at the communication equipment, which was located in a specific trailer within his mobile complex. Elena's plan required her to position herself at a location that provided sightlines to all 4 possible communication sites. She found such a position on a mountainside that overlooked the entire valley where Petrov operated. The distances were extreme, ranging from 3 to 4 miles to the various sites, but Elena had made longer shots before. The challenge wasn't just the distance. Elena had to remain in position for up to a week. waiting for Petrov to appear at one of the communication sites during a transmission window. She had to be ready to take the shot within seconds of positive target identification before Petrov's security team could react to the threat. Elena established her position during a moonless night, carrying enough supplies to sustain herself for 10 days if necessary. Her hide site was expertly camouflaged among the mountain rocks, invisible to both visual and electronic surveillance. She had clear sight lines to all 4 communication locations through different shooting ports in her concealment. For 3 days, Elena watched Petrov's convoy move between different locations in the valley. She observed his security procedures, noting the deployment patterns of his guards and the timing of their activities. She identified the communication trailer by its distinctive antenna array and the additional security measures that surrounded it during transmission periods. On the 4th day, Elena received word through her encrypted radio that Petrov was preparing for a critical communication session. Intelligence sources had intercepted preparations for a high-level conference that would require Petrov's personal participation. He would have to appear at one of the communication sites within the next 12 hours. Elena positioned herself at the shooting port that provided the best angles to the most likely communication sites. Through her scope, she could see Petrov's convoy arriving at the 3rd location, an abandoned industrial facility that provided both security and optimal satellite access. Multiple vehicles surrounded the communication trailer as guards established a defensive perimeter. Elena watched through her scope as several figures emerged from the convoy vehicles. Petrov's security team had become even more sophisticated since her previous missions. They were using multiple decoys even for routine movements, making target identification extremely difficult from long range. But Elena had studied Petrov's personal habits extensively during her mission preparation. Despite his use of body doubles, certain behaviors were too distinctive to replicate perfectly. Petrov was left-handed, walked with a slight limp from an old injury, and had a nervous habit of adjusting his glasses before important conversations. Elena identified the real Petrov by these subtle behavioral markers as he approached the communication trailer. His body doubles could mimic his appearance and general mannerisms, but they couldn't replicate the unconscious physical habits that revealed his true identity to someone who knew what to look for. The range to the target was 3,400 meters, well beyond the distance of Elena's previous longest shot. Environmental conditions were challenging, with variable mountain winds and temperature gradients that would affect bullet trajectory. Most difficult of all, Elena had only a narrow window of opportunity before Petrov would enter the heavily armored communication trailer. Elena controlled her breathing and settled into her shooting position. Her rifle had been specifically modified for this extreme-range shot, with a custom barrel and specialized ammunition designed for maximum accuracy at unprecedented distances. The mathematics of the shot required calculations that pushed the limits of ballistic science. Through her scope, Elena watched Petrov pause outside the communication trailer, speaking briefly with his security chief. This was her opportunity. Petrov was stationary, clearly identified, and still outside the protection of the armored trailer. Elena's finger found the trigger as she made final adjustments for wind and distance. The shot flew through the mountain air for over 4 seconds, covering the enormous distance while accounting for wind drift, bullet drop, and atmospheric conditions. Elena watched through her scope as Petrov suddenly pitched forward, falling to the ground outside the communication trailer. His security team immediately swarmed around him, but Elena could see from their frantic movements that her shot had found its target. Elena immediately began her extraction procedure. Petrov's forces would locate her muzzle flash and call in artillery strikes within minutes. She had to clear the area before the mountain position became a target for retaliatory fire. Her escape route took her down the backside of the mountain, away from the valley where Petrov's forces were concentrated. As Elena moved through the mountain forest, she could hear the sounds of artillery shells impacting her former position. Petrov's security team was conducting a systematic bombardment of the entire mountainside, hoping to eliminate the sniper who had achieved what 3 previous assassination attempts had failed to accomplish. But Elena was already miles away from the impact zone, following predetermined escape routes toward her extraction point. The mission was complete. General Alexander Petrov, master of biological warfare and expert in personal security, had been eliminated by a single shot from a distance that pushed the absolute limits of sniper capabilities. The strategic impact of Petrov's elimination would become apparent in the days ahead, as his biological weapons program collapsed without his scientific leadership and political connections. But Elena was already thinking about her next assignment, knowing that somewhere, military planners were developing even more challenging missions that would test the boundaries of what one person with a rifle could accomplish. 2 years had passed since Elena's impossible shot that eliminated General Petrov, and her reputation had grown beyond the military community. Intelligence agencies, special operations forces, and government officials from allied nations had all requested her services for missions that conventional forces couldn't accomplish. Elena had become something more than a soldier. She was a strategic asset whose capabilities could change the course of conflicts. But success had brought unexpected consequences. Elena found herself increasingly isolated from normal military life. Her missions were so classified that she couldn't discuss them with fellow soldiers. Her skills were so specialized that standard training exercises no longer provided meaningful challenges. Most significantly, the expectations placed on her had grown to the point where failure was no longer considered a possibility. Elena sat in the briefing room at an undisclosed location, listening to yet another presentation about an impossible target. This time, the mission involved eliminating a terrorist leader who was planning to detonate a nuclear device in a major population center. The target was hidden in a fortress-like compound surrounded by mountains, protected by surface-to-air missiles, and defended by fanatic followers who were prepared to die to protect him. The compound is impregnable to conventional assault, explained Colonel Harrison, the mission commander. Airstrikes would risk detonating the nuclear material. Ground assault would result in massive casualties and might not succeed before the device is triggered. We need precision elimination of the target while leaving the nuclear material secure for recovery. Elena studied the satellite imagery and intelligence reports with growing concern. This wasn't just a difficult shot. It was a situation that required her to operate under conditions that eliminated virtually every advantage she had relied on in previous missions. The target rarely appeared in the open. The compound's location made traditional sniper positions impossible. Most critically, the entire operation had to be completed within a narrow time window, before the terrorist's deadline. What's the maximum range from any viable shooting position? Elena asked. 4,800 meters from the closest position that provides line of sight to the compound, Colonel Harrison replied. That's assuming we can get you into position without being detected by their perimeter security. Elena had never attempted a shot at that distance. The ballistic calculations alone pushed beyond proven mathematical models. Environmental factors at such extreme range could cause bullet deviation measured in yards rather than inches. Even with perfect conditions and flawless execution, the probability of success was marginal. But Elena also understood the consequences of refusing the mission. Intelligence estimates suggested that the terrorist's nuclear device could kill hundreds of thousands of people if detonated in the planned target city. Conventional military options had been exhausted. Political solutions had failed. Elena's rifle represented the last remaining option for preventing a catastrophe. I'll need 48 hours to study the problem and develop an approach, Elena said finally. If I determine the mission is feasible, I'll need complete operational control and unlimited resources for equipment and support. Elena spent the next 2 days immersed in technical analysis that went far beyond normal mission planning. She consulted with ballistics experts, meteorologists, and even aerospace engineers who understood the physics of long-range projectile flight. The mathematical models required computer assistance to account for all the variables involved in such an extreme shot. The breakthrough came when Elena realized that conventional sniper tactics wouldn't work for this mission. Instead of trying to make an impossible shot under adverse conditions, she needed to create conditions that would make the shot possible. This required thinking beyond the rifle and bullet to consider the entire operational environment. Elena's plan involved a coordinated deception operation that would force the target to appear at a specific location at a predetermined time. Rather than waiting for a random opportunity, she would create the opportunity she needed. This required cooperation from intelligence assets inside the terrorist organization, electronic warfare specialists, and even psychological operations experts. The execution phase began with Elena positioning herself at the extreme range limit in a carefully prepared hide site. Her equipment had been modified specifically for this mission, with a custom rifle system that pushed the boundaries of mechanical precision. Every component had been hand-built and tested under controlled conditions that simulated the operational environment. Elena's support team initiated the deception operation exactly on schedule. False intelligence was fed to the terrorist organization, suggesting that government forces were planning an imminent assault from a specific direction. Electronic warfare systems created fake communication signatures that supported the deception. Psychological operations specialists spread rumors among the terrorists' followers that were designed to force a specific response. The plan worked perfectly. The terrorist leader emerged from his underground bunker to personally direct defensive preparations against the phantom assault. For exactly 90 seconds, he stood on an elevated platform within the compound, visible to Elena's scope across the impossible distance. Elena had been preparing for this moment for 3 days. Every environmental factor had been measured and calculated. Wind conditions were optimal. Temperature and humidity were within acceptable ranges. Most importantly, Elena's mental and physical condition was as perfect as human preparation could achieve. The shot represented the absolute pinnacle of sniper capability. Elena's bullet traveled for over 6 seconds across terrain that included valleys, ridges, and atmospheric layers with different wind patterns and air densities. The mathematical precision required to account for all these factors and still hit a human-sized target was at the very edge of what was theoretically possible. Elena watched through her scope as the bullet completed its impossible journey and found its target. The terrorist leader collapsed on the platform. His nuclear deadline permanently ended. Within hours, Special Forces teams secured the compound and recovered the nuclear device, preventing the catastrophe that would have claimed hundreds of thousands of innocent lives. But as Elena packed her equipment and prepared for extraction, she realized that this mission had changed something fundamental about her career. She had just accomplished what military experts had considered impossible, even for her. The shot had required not just skill and preparation, but an element of luck that couldn't be reliably replicated. 2 years had passed since Elena's impossible shot that eliminated General Petrov, and her reputation had grown beyond the military community. Intelligence agencies, special operations forces, and government officials from allied nations had all requested her services for missions that conventional forces couldn't accomplish. Elena had become something more than a soldier. She was a strategic asset whose capabilities could change the course of conflicts. But success had brought unexpected consequences. Elena found herself increasingly isolated from normal military life. Her missions were so classified that she couldn't discuss them with fellow soldiers. Her skills were so specialized that standard training exercises no longer provided meaningful challenges. Most significantly, the expectations placed on her had grown to the point where failure was no longer considered a possibility. Elena sat in the briefing room at an undisclosed location, listening to yet another presentation about an impossible target. This time, the mission involved eliminating a terrorist leader who was planning to detonate a nuclear device in a major population center. The target was hidden in a fortress-like compound surrounded by mountains, protected by surface-to-air missiles, and defended by fanatic followers who were prepared to die to protect him. The compound is impregnable to conventional assault, explained Colonel Harrison, the mission commander. Airstrikes would risk detonating the nuclear material. Ground assault would result in massive casualties and might not succeed before the device is triggered. We need precision elimination of the target while leaving the nuclear material secure for recovery. Elena studied the satellite imagery and intelligence reports with growing concern. This wasn't just a difficult shot. It was a situation that required her to operate under conditions that eliminated virtually every advantage she had relied on in previous missions. The target rarely appeared in the open. The compound's location made traditional sniper positions impossible. Most critically, the entire operation had to be completed within a narrow time window before the terrorist's deadline. "What's the maximum range from any viable shooting position?" Elena asked. 4,800 meters from the closest position that provides line of sight to the compound, Colonel Harrison replied. "That's assuming we can get you into position without being detected by their perimeter security." Elena had never attempted a shot at that distance. The ballistic calculations alone pushed beyond proven mathematical models. Environmental factors at such extreme range could cause bullet deviation measured in yards rather than inches. Even with perfect conditions and flawless execution, the probability of success was marginal. But Elena also understood the consequences of refusing the mission. Intelligence estimates suggested that the terrorists' nuclear device could kill hundreds of thousands of people if detonated in the planned target city. Conventional military options had been exhausted. Political solutions had failed. Elena's rifle represented the last remaining option for preventing a catastrophe. "I'll need 48 hours to study the problem and develop an approach," Elena said finally. "If I determine the mission is feasible, I'll need complete operational control and unlimited resources for equipment and support." Elena spent the next 2 days immersed in technical analysis that went far beyond normal mission planning. She consulted with ballistics experts, meteorologists, and even aerospace engineers who understood the physics of long-range projectile flight. The mathematical models required computer assistance to account for all the variables involved in such an extreme shot. The breakthrough came when Elena realized that conventional sniper tactics wouldn't work for this mission. Instead of trying to make an impossible shot under adverse conditions, she needed to create conditions that would make the shot possible. This required thinking beyond the rifle and bullet to consider the entire operational environment. Elena's plan involved a coordinated deception operation that would force the target to appear at a specific location at a predetermined time. Rather than waiting for a random opportunity, she would create the opportunity she needed. This required cooperation from intelligence assets inside the terrorist organization, electronic warfare specialists, and even psychological operations experts. The execution phase began with Elena positioning herself at the extreme range limit in a carefully prepared hide site. Her equipment had been modified specifically for this mission, with a custom rifle system that pushed the boundaries of mechanical precision. Every component had been hand-built and tested under controlled conditions that simulated the operational environment. Elena's support team initiated the deception operation exactly on schedule. False intelligence was fed to the terrorist organization, suggesting that government forces were planning an imminent assault from a specific direction. Electronic warfare systems created fake communication signatures that supported the deception. Psychological operations specialists spread rumors among the terrorist followers that were designed to force a specific response. The plan worked perfectly. The terrorist leader emerged from his underground bunker to personally direct defensive preparations against the phantom assault. For exactly 90 seconds, he stood on an elevated platform within the compound, visible to Elena's scope across the impossible distance. Elena had been preparing for this moment for 3 days. Every environmental factor had been measured and calculated. Wind conditions were optimal. Temperature and humidity were within acceptable ranges. Most importantly, Elena's mental and physical condition was as perfect as human preparation could achieve. The shot represented the absolute pinnacle of sniper capability. Elena's bullet traveled for over 6 seconds across terrain that included valleys, ridges, and atmospheric layers with different wind patterns and air densities. The mathematical precision required to account for all these factors and still hit a human-sized target was at the very edge of what was theoretically possible. Elena watched through her scope as the bullet completed its impossible journey and found its target. The terrorist leader collapsed on the platform. His nuclear deadline permanently ended. Within hours, special forces teams secured the compound and recovered the nuclear device, preventing the catastrophe that would have claimed hundreds of thousands of innocent lives. But as Elena packed her equipment and prepared for extraction, she realized that this mission had changed something fundamental about her career. She had just accomplished what military experts had considered impossible. Even for her, the shot had required not just skill and preparation, but an element of luck that couldn't be reliably replicated. Elena understood that she had reached the absolute limit of what one person with a rifle could accomplish. Future missions would inevitably ask her to exceed these limits, to attempt shots that were not just difficult but genuinely impossible. The expectations placed on her had grown beyond human capability, and eventually those expectations would lead to failure. During the flight back to base, Elena made a decision that would surprise everyone who knew her professional history. She submitted a formal request for reassignment to training duties, where she could pass on her knowledge and skills to the next generation of precision marksmen. Elena had proven that the impossible was possible, But she also understood that wisdom included knowing when to stop pushing the boundaries. Commander Jackson, now promoted to general, accepted her request with understanding that came from years of working with exceptional soldiers. "You've accomplished things that will be studied and admired for generations, Vasquez. Training the next generation of snipers might be the most important mission of your career." Elena smiled slightly. "Every mission is important, sir. But I think it's time for someone else to prove that the impossible is just another challenge waiting to be overcome." 6 months later, Elena stood on a training range watching a young sniper attempt a shot that she herself had made routine years earlier. The student was talented, dedicated, and possessed the kind of natural ability that could be developed into exceptional skill. But more importantly, the student had the humility to learn and the wisdom to understand that true precision came from preparation rather than luck. "Remember," Elena told her student as he prepared for his shot, "the target doesn't know it's impossible to hit. Your job is to prove that impossible is just another word for hasn't been done yet." Elena had become something more than a sniper. She had become a teacher, a mentor, and a guardian of knowledge that could protect innocent lives for generations to come. Her rifle was silent now, but her legacy would continue through every student who learned that precision, preparation, and dedication could overcome any obstacle. The war continued, and there would always be impossible targets that needed to be eliminated. But now there would be others ready to take those shots, trained by the woman who had quietly proven that nobody truly meant somebody just hadn't tried hard enough yet.